So I think a fitting end to the panel in terms of scientists, statesmen, stateswomen, is Kesha Rogers, who perhaps needs no introduction, but I'll give a brief one nonetheless anyway. Um, Kesha obviously won her campaign or the Democratic nomination in Texas, in the district where the Johnson Space Center is, twice in the House of Representatives, running as a Democrat to calling for the impeachment of Barack Hussein Obama. However, as much as that may have been shocking to have a Democrat win calling for the impeachment of Obama, what obviously her role in the space program was essential in fighting for that, as Obama was seeking to dismantle it. And then, of course, went on to a very successful Senate run that caught not just national news, but international news. So, for that hard work, Mr. LaRouche has blessed her and is now giving her the easy task of reviving our space program, the one that's been in systematic disintegration and destruction since the death of John F. Kennedy, and of course under Obama has gone into hyper phase of that disintegration. So, but I can think of no better candidate to carry out that mission than Kesha. So, without further ado.
Um, okay, so I think that what we want to start with right now, first of all, I will say that it has been a blessing for Mr. LaRouche because it really gets at the heart of what we have as a gift to restore to our contributions to the world if we choose to take the actions which are necessary. And first of all, what I want to say is that what Mrs. LaRouche brought up at the beginning of her discussion on the question of the threat facing mankind and the absence of the discussion of the war policy, the policy toward extinction of mankind, and what we're seeing today in our political realm has to be addressed from that standpoint, that that discussion can no longer be absent. And I think, as Senator Gravel said earlier, anyone who is going to keep us out of this threat of war is not President Obama. His actions for the continued drive and provocations toward a war of annihilation, is what is threatening the very existence of our human fabric and who we are as a species. Now, that gets at the core of what the policy against our space program has truly represented. Because many people know I ran a campaign, as Dave said, opposing the president's policy for dismantling our space program. But what I'd like to through today is really what the underlying factor of that really is, and why it is that, first of all, none of these presidential candidates right now have a policy of actually taking up a policy toward mankind's mission in space, not even Senator Bernie Sanders. And what we need right now is we have to go away from the compromise that has been made with this president and his policies toward the dismantling of our space program and the recognition that that is a threat to our very human existence. And the fact of the matter is that these presidential candidates, not only do they not have a space policy, but they have continued to capitulate to President Obama's policy of war and capitulate to President Obama's policy of not collaborating with nations which would represent an integrated interest of who we are as a human species, particularly in space exploration. So now I think this has been a conception and understanding of Mr. LaRouche's for a very long time. What we need right now is a transformation of our identity as a human species. And the best way to do that is by the understanding of mankind's role in the exploration of and conquering of space. Now, what the space program represents is not just a technological aspect and not just the development of new technologies, but it gets at a very philosophy that governs the very fabric of our human existence. And I think it is important to make that point clear because I know, first of all, that there are a lot of my colleagues or people out here today who have very technical backgrounds and who are probably a lot more competent in various aspects of the space program and science than I am. But what I would like to offer in this dialogue and discussion is, first of all, what has been detracted, from the space program from the standpoint of what the great German space pioneer Krafft Ehricke contributed to the space program and why Krafft Ehricke was a great collaborator and someone who became very close to Mr. LaRouche and Mr. LaRouche's thinking and our movement's thinking and the policy that governs the understanding of space exploration and governs not just space exploration, but the destiny of who we are as a species and mankind, what our contributions are to actually eliminating the threats of a system which is accepted of a system of limitations posed on mankind, that there are no limitations to be posed on the existence of mankind. Now, I think that, first of all, to look at Krafft Ehricke for a second here, and I want to leave plenty of time for questions and answers, and then I'm going to get into a little bit more of his philosophical conceptions. One of the things, first of all, for people who don't know, Krafft Ehricke was a German scientist who actually came to the United States and worked as a part of the Operation Paperclip with scientists such as von Braun and others after his work on the V2 rocket and in Germany. Now, what's very fascinating about Krafft Ehricke is he did not believe or accept the conditions of practicality or of a idea of actually doing that which is acceptable per se. But I think one of the things to look at is that he actually had a policy that can be used as a philosophy which governs the existence of relationships between nations, people, and our relationship to the cosmos and to the solar system as a whole. And what he talked about is the conception of nations moving from the understanding of the limitations of a single planet, a one globe planet, to that of a polyglobal world. And I think that if we're going to solve the conflict of war, of what we see facing the attack on our relationship as nations, as human beings, we have to really look at what Russia and China and these nations are doing to define that new conception and new destiny of what Krafft Ehricke understood as the emergence of a polyglobal world, a world that expands out into the outer reaches of our solar system that actually rejects the limitations posed on mankind. Now, if you look at Krafft Ehricke, he really had an understanding of, first of all, what would lead to a society which accepts dictatorship, a society which accepts chauvinistic policies in the political realm, or a society that accepts the dismantling of nations or nations being divided. And he talked about two opposing views of society. One was called an open world conception of mankind, which rejects limitations posed on mankind. And the other view was called a closed world conception. In just a moment, I'm going to go into that. But he understood this also because he lived through those conditions, being in World War II Germany, and also understanding the conditions of the people who accepted the policies of fascism under Hitler, and also what those conditions led to in terms of the threats that they brought about and the consequences that they brought about. You know, he was actually uh, drafted to go into military war in first of all in France. There he was hurt in France. He got rolled over by a tank. Uh, I should back up and say prior prior to this, let me just back up because the the identity of Krafft Ehricke really started as a young child at the age of 12 years old when he was introduced to the great German space pioneer and the work of Hermann Oberth, excuse me, and uh, he saw the movie The Woman in the Moon, and this completely transformed Krafft Ehricke's life. Now, later on in life, he went to college at the Technological University of Berlin and studied aerospace, aeronautical engineering, pardon me. And after that, and that was in 1938, and later on, at the end of 1938, he was drafted into the war, into France, where he served, and he was hurt. And he actually had his leg broken in several places, being run over by a tanker. After that, he was actually um, sent back to Berlin and recovered there, continued his studies in engineering, continued to promote, even through the horrors and the conflicts of the threat of war and what the policy around the fascist policy of Hitler represented, continued to try to promote the importance of the exploration of space and where mankind would soon go. Um, Later on, just a couple of years later, in 43, I think it was, he was actually sent to Russia, where he was the commander on the Russian front of a unit there. Now, what happened is that he was actually called because of the papers he was publishing on rocket design and some of his other works, called to work with von Braun and others at the Peenemünde facility. Now, after this, one thing that Krafft Ehricke found out is that his unit that was sent to Russia was wiped out. So you almost had the contributions to what became our U.S. space program, the contributions to what we were able to accomplish around the development of the Apollo mission, and even before that, missions around Mercury and other missions would have probably not existed if it had been for that very potential elimination of Krafft Ehricke and his contributions and work. But yet and still, I find him very remarkable because despite all of this, when the first team of engineers, the first team of scientists were sent to the United States, to Fort Bliss, Texas, he declined going. This was right after the war. He declined going because he had a wife in Berlin. He was in Bavaria at the time. Krafft Ehricke walked for 30 days because all the infrastructure, remember, had been wiped out, to 30 days to the capital of Berlin to find his wife. After that, they continued to go on to the U.S. Now, I wanted to put that tidbit of history there because you really, the determination of a human mind, the determination that of the contributions of a single individual, this gets at what we represent as the creative potential of human individuals to overcome any obstacles and to actually fight for that which is truly human. And that's what Krafft Ehricke represented. That's what our organization, what Mr. LaRouche, has continued to fight for. And what Krafft Ehricke made clear in his understanding of the importance of the conception of space exploration. And this what has to be the model for why we endeavor into the development of space. It's not necessarily because of the technological advancements, although those are well, but he had a different idea, which I think is founded. One second. I want to just share with you quickly here. Okay. Krafft Ehricke says the concept of space travel carries with it enormous impact because it challenges man on practically all fronts of his physical and spiritual existence. The idea of traveling to other celestial bodies reflects to the highest degree the independence and agility of the human mind. It lends ultimate dignity to man's technical and scientific endeavors. Above all, it touches on the philosophy of his very existence. As a result, the concept of space travel disregards national borders, refuses to recognize differences of historical or ethnological origins, and penetrates the fiber of one sociological or political creed as fast as that of the next. And I think that what we're seeing right now from the standpoint of what is being expressed by the emergence of a new conception of mankind, a new era, a new paradigm for mankind being represented by what Russia and China and the 50% of the world are moving toward is the only choice and option that we have right now for a new renewed conception of who we are as a species. None of this political stuff is going to suffice. No other lower conception will suffice. Now, I want to bring up again what it is that we're dealing with when we look at what has been adopted around the political policies that have been accepted in the transatlantic system, been accepted in a system of a collapsing worldview, of a dominant view of a no growth policy, of a limitations posed on mankind that we're seeing coming from the system of the British Empire, the United States, and the West through the drive toward war and the drive toward the collapsing economic conditions by the acceptance of a Wall Street policy, versus that which we're seeing as an open world system, which is defined, Krafft Ehricke defines as the removal of limitations and to actually take the economic expansions that we're seeing right now and not only provide those for the expansion throughout the world, but throughout our solar system. So let's take a look at this for a second. Because the philosophy of a closed world system has been a dominant one, and it is now that dominant philosophy is under attack and is being removed. Do you guys have my chart there? And I would just say this is the debate that is well worth having right now in any kind of political um, realm, whether Democrat, Republican, or whatever. But this is the question of the human debate over who we are and what our mission and destiny as a human species is, which connects all of us on whatever our backgrounds are to the understanding of what our contributions to the future of mankind must be centered on. Because it's only going to be under this question of what are going to be the contributions of what we give to those generations, those children not yet born, what we actually instill in the understanding of society that rejects the idea that you can eliminate and exterminate the very existence of mankind through nuclear annihilation. That if we look at who we are as a species, that cannot be accepted. Okay, thank you. Yes, here we are. Okay, so what I've done here is I've had my handy associate, my husband, actually put together these charts for me, and and what this is actually these are charts that he just enhanced from the works of Krafft Ehricke of a schematic that he made in the 1970s on the principle of a growth versus no growth world, open world versus closed world system. And this is, you think about the growth paradigm, it, it really gets at the rejection to the compelling view of society based on limitations to growth posed on mankind. And it actually talks about the rejection of an entropic worldview. And also, if you can see, it's moving up in terms of the development around advancements in technology, advancements in a global society, also looking at the understanding of a what we would call a maximum open world system. And it's very fascinating because Krafft Ehricke was really um, forecasting what was to come in terms of the acceptance of a society of bestiality, a society that accepted a chauvinistic view, political worldview, geopolitical policies, and accepted what what was he even understood were the wrongs or the consequences of a Club of Rome's no growth policy, which was not the nature of who we are as a human species. And this this right here is the pinnacle of what we see happening in the policies which Dr. Chang laid out right now, just a few moments ago, very powerfully. And also, go to the next slide for me. What we see as the acceptance move into a polyglobal world that is being led by Russia and China. What you see here are the consequences of a growth paradigm. As Dr. Chang laid out, this growth paradigm right now is the emergence of the 40-year fight of Mr. and Mrs. LaRouche around the Silk Road Development Plan, of the policy for space exploration, the travel to the far side of the moon, which will become a new total transformation of mankind in the coming 2 years now, when China reaches that endeavor of doing something and making the accomplishment that has never been accomplished before. The And I won't go through all of these projects. I want to put this up there. The two red dots there are Russia and China's new uh, cosmology systems, launch pad, excuse me, and their space launch centers. The long purple line there that goes from China to Duisburg, Germany, is the rail connection and corridors of development there. You have also the development around the south-north water projects of China in the blue there, and also the development of the Chabahar port going from India to up. So this is the growth paradigm that rejects those limitations that have been posed on mankind. Now, on the other side, Krafft Ehricke knew what would happen if we didn't move in that direction. And let me see the other next slide, please. These are the consequences of a no-growth system, a no-growth paradigm, which actually takes up this conception of a limited resources, a winding down of our system, and the idea that there are basic, there are limitations that can be posed on the progress of mankind. And he made very clear, and you look at this and you see this exactly where we are today in the transatlantic system and under the policies promoted by the British, promoted by President Obama, and promoted by those who would continue to allow such actions, particularly around what we're seeing in NATO escalation and provocations of war on the Baltic Sea, what we're seeing in the South China Sea, that if you accepted this no-growth consequence, the results would be extreme poverty, mass starvation, wars. And, I mean, Krafft Ehricke was right on the mark with his understanding of what happens to a society that allows for the elimination of their creative identity as a species and to accept political, geopolitical policies that say that human beings are nothing more than beasts. And this closed world system at this very moment is being rejected by what Russia and China are representing. And just go to the next slide quickly here. This is, you think about what you just saw in terms of the development plans being represented by Russia and China, India, and throughout the world with, as Dr. Chang laid out, the water development project, the projects toward high-speed rail systems, the expansion into space exploration, and why it is that represents a threat to the no-growth policy that we're seeing here in terms of the hotspots of provocations of war. And this is just a few. I don't think it actually even has Yemen there, but you get the picture of if you took that other growth map and what we're seeing with these development plans and put this on top of it, you know why that represents a threat to the empire's drive toward a war of extinction and annihilation, and why this has to be stopped now. So now, I think that we have a great potential and opportunity in front of us. And what I wanted to demonstrate here is to look at very directly and clinically why Mrs. LaRouche said that the absence of the discussion of the threat posed on mankind cannot be accepted, because until we discuss this threat, we will not be able to actually solve the problem. from the standpoint of our human ability to transcend mankind out of this very threat to its existence. And we have the potential to do that. And we have the potential of actually taking mankind to a new level of cooperation that has been long forgotten. And that's what we're seeing right now develop by which requires the renewed creativity of who we are as a being, of who we are in terms of our understanding of what we have to bring about for the future. Just go to the next slide quickly here. I, you know, you you look at what it is that we have to create. We have to look into the future right now. And most people don't have that conception anymore because we've lost a sense of our creative identity. You know, we're thinking about the now. How do I survive? What am I going to survive on? You know, how am I going to make my next paycheck? But Krafft Ehricke had a different idea about mankind, that the threat of starvation, what we're facing right now in terms of what people think are unsolvable problems on Earth, are absolutely solvable if we come together around a understanding of our extraterrestrial imperative as a species, that we can solve these problems by rejecting the limitations that have been posed on us and to go out into the destiny of space. Now, this is a artist drawing by Krafft Ehricke of a moon colony. And I thought it was very interesting that recently, first of all, you've had a lot of discussion, including at a recent conference, the head of the European Space Agency made the point of the importance of mankind going out into space, and he said that we have to actually develop moon villages on the moon, and also what our destiny is for the development of the colonization of Mars, um, and that this is something that is being discussed right now by China, who wants to send astronauts to the moon also by 2036. And it is something that China and Russia are working on in collaboration, and other nations around the world are developing. And you know, you say, how are we gonna do that? Well, we're gonna do that because we're going to actually have an extension of what we can actually do in terms of solving the problems here on Earth by understanding the resources that exist within our solar system, such as the development of helium-3 on the moon, which is a very important resource to develop, and which actually can be brought about. Go to the next one. By the understanding that we have to have a new renewed focus on development, our understanding of the importance of a move toward fusion, nuclear power. This is actually a freight lunar freighter that would allow for bringing different resources to the moon, that vehicles for a flotilla of vehicles to go to the moon, to develop the moon, and to develop the resources on the moon that would allow us to expand onto Mars and other planetary bodies. But Krafft Ehricke, even though he in the beginning understood and was a promoter of the importance of the hydrofuels, chemical fuels, he knew that at a certain point, our exploration into space was going to have to be done through the development of nuclear power resources. So he had a creative imagination that took the mind of man out of that which says that we cannot solve these problems and that we can pose limitations on ourselves, because he made very clear that the philosophy of man rejects this conception. The philosophy of our human species rejects this conception. And go back to that previous slide. You know, and I was thinking about the Russian counselor earlier, who talked about the uh, creation of borders and conflicts, and the place that we really would experience the elimination of these conflicts, which divide families, divide people, and actually pit nations against each other, is mankind's participation in the collaboration around the development of space exploration. And you just think about it. They're on the moon. There's not going to be a territory for Russia, a territory for China, a territory for India, and so forth. There are not going to be nuclear weapons on the moon. There's going to be a whole different conception for mankind. And that's something that people can't even wrap their minds around, because we've been so acceptant of this closed world system, of this one world system, that we have lost sight of our human species has a destiny. And that destiny can only be understood through this very identity of why we fight for the space program, of why it is that we have now the opportunity to put an end once and for all to the geopolitical view of a world of annihilation of mankind and limitations posed on mankind. So I want to, I believe, leave my remarks there. I hope I've given you something to think about in terms of, if you look at the culmination of the entire day today, the policy view that we have an opportunity to overcome these challenges if we choose to do the right thing is really identified in our conception and understanding of what is going to unify us as a species, what's going to develop and expand our human species to a level that's never been known before. I think Russia and China and the nations joining them are ready to do that and have made a commitment to do that. The question is whether the American people, whether you are ready to do that.